Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another Kame House lobby with the 2MK team. This is an East Coast lobby, US East Coast 2. And its loser stays on. So feel free to join us. The passcode is 2717. You're looking for a red hit standing outside of Kame House in the ring match priority O2 lobby. Note that there is no restriction on the connection that can actually join, but once again, obviously you're going to get more out of it if you join us, if you at least are relatively close to the US East Coast. Last week we were covering adult Gohan stuff, basically how to get out of his scrambles by moving forward, and the same sorts of things we discussed before relative to using your meter in various situations to get your advantages and shift around the game.
の勘が鈍ってるな。大人になって一緒に戦うなんてなんだか不思議な感じですね。
I'm going to choose to believe that Brawly Command grabbed my internet.
Get ready for battle.
Once again, hopefully we won't have any serious issues. It was just a PS party drop, honestly.
Get ready. Let's go.
So, last week we covered various fighting styles and those ways that the meter is used in certain matchups for those fighting styles. The higher depth of understanding of interactions for particular characters with each other is something people work out on their own, but if you really want to just quickly get into it and recognize the start of certain things, start by understanding how to use your meter in your matchups so that you get to keep your main game plan going. Whether that be zoning, rushdown and mix-ups, defensive mix-ups, or just frustrating counterplay, because that is a thing. In fact, it's even more of a thing now with the release of Brawly and Bardock. You know what we need is DLC Super Saiyan Nappa. I think he gets a beard. Other minor recent things have changed in the game. Probably don't affect players at the beginner or close to beginner level. So we're going to continue this week with more so talking about matchups, universal mechanics, and meter usage. Because it's hard to get anywhere in this game, even with fabulous setups and combos, if you don't have those. Our combos we can train on our own. Our game plan often needs at least some help.
そう受け止める勇気があるか。
まだいけるまだいける。
トランクス大丈夫か。
そこか。飛べ。
交代できますか。
セルがいい。セルがいい。
やばい。
飛べ。どうだ。遅い。セルがいい。
見えた。よっと。
It is through choosing how to use your meter that you can make most characters in this game into a point character if you really desire it. It'll always be true that there are some characters who are better at raw performance in those situations due to either damage or general game plan once they have enough meter, but never give up on the idea that your particular style may work to make any character an anchor and to make most characters a point character.
Brace yourself for the coming battle.
One good example is that the defensive mix-up style seen on Just Vine's side has 3 characters who basically don't have a particularly good use for meter in normal situations. But by using that specific style, it's possible to find uses for the meter on all 3 of them that don't necessarily lead to any use of supers, assists, or combined supers basically.
せいぜい楽しませてくれよ。
In turn, the opponent is benefiting from being either really close or really far away, preventing that style from making good use of assists or meter. Understanding how to respond to your opponent doing that sort of thing is what saves you from massive frustrations in almost all fighting games, this one most included. Fortunately, most of these characters are in fact relatively good at playing neutral. If they stay still long enough. Defensive mix-up characters tend to suffer when the opponent is being extremely defensive from far away themselves, as it leaves you with no strong approaches that don't get defended. It can also be too tempting to constantly try to get closer or get in on them, but many characters have ways out of this that result in a lot of pain for you if you try this. The result is that one must be extremely patient and spend a lot more time in the air, but fortunately Cell is really good at this. Cell can do a lot of attacks from just jumping straight up or without particularly trying to get in. Nappa is also relatively capable of this after he's gotten a good knock away or put down a Cyberman or something. But if he goes forward, he's not really as effective. You can see the fighting style that shows up here. He's extremely good at holding that space on screen. So the match can be entirely turned around by simply recognizing that your opponent's fighting style has shifted or changed, and that you need to respond in a different way to it. It's very important in this game above all others that we have seen so far. This is the game where this matters the most in all our experience so far. It is extremely important to keep your plan in mind and not let what you consider to be the victory conditions of the game overwrite your plan.
Get ready for battle!
Furthermore, obviously, it is important to have a relatively separate overarching plan against all 5 effective forms of opponent play. This is something we taught a while back, probably last year in Street Fighter, but it applies just as much. Your opponent cannot defeat you if they cannot control the game plan, the flow of the situation. They lose entirely based on not knowing what to expect from you. And the reason it's therefore so important in Dragonball FighterZ is the amount of motion and confusion in the game that occurs when someone has a clear game plan. The game simply moves too fast for the average player to know what the opponent's game plan or goal is, especially for the more complex characters. This may be part of why the current climate is tilted toward characters with very variable game plans. Simply because reacting to everything that could be done that is effective is just too hard to do. It is much more likely for most of us to learn fighting games from the perspective of frame data, punish this, I want to do this move, do rush down. This only takes you so far in Dragonball FighterZ. As your opponent's defense improves, or as their understanding of their own game plan improves, you find yourself unable to keep up and getting dismantled in neutral. When you find that most of the game is a struggle to even get in to get your combo started, it's usually a sign that your game plan is somewhat lacking. It's impossible to completely predict your opponent's game plan at every moment. Your aim therefore needs to be understanding what they have in mind for when you are on the offensive. And if you can keep them in a mindset that would lead to bad things happening to them.
緒に戦ってもやっぱり僕はお前を味方だとは思えない。
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
Trunks, 私をがっかりさせないでくれ。お前を殺すぞ、セル。
Are you ready?
大丈夫ですか？
One of the primary things one needs to understand as a defensive mix-up player is that being put into the space where you get your mix-up does not mean it's your turn or that you should actually try to do the mix-up. When your opponent is the one that has put you in that space, it's usually at the end of their block string, which means that they are as prepared as they could possibly be for your mix-up. And also probably not going to keep attacking you. It depends on your character and what game, but these ones are certainly good at making sure of that. This means that one of the most painful places for a defensive mix-up character to be actually is on defense after pressure. Because at that point is when they become easy to bait into doing things they shouldn't do. One of their best options in most games is to backdash. Mostly because the opponent's spacing with most characters will not reach them even if they reacted to the backdash happening. This resets the neutral situation and gives the defensive mix-up player enough space to have a reaction to the opponent's movement. In short, use the backdash to buy oneself time to decide what you want to actually do. An opponent that continues to come forward often puts themselves directly into the space of this, and you don't really get hurt. You get to keep doing this for a bit. Once you have got them into the mindset that they can do something because you are going to backdash, this will re-enable your ability to do defensive mix-ups. Basically, if your aim is to confuse your opponent and make them feel uncomfortable, the highest capacity to change their conditioning and mess up their expectations is to backdash out of their lock strings and pressure. Once you have done this, it will make them at least somewhat unwilling to take immediate actions, since many of those actions would then be punishable. On offense, this is much less important. Most players who play this sort of character know exactly how to use their assists and their block strings and similar things to leave them where they want to be to set up their defensive mix-ups on their own. Therefore, it becomes important more so when they have lost control of the spacing by the opponent taking action. As you can see right there, taking the action just led to being blocked, and it most of the time will be what happens because the opponent has specifically created that situation for themselves. The other main option in this game is to simply raw vanish straight out of the scramble. Depending on your character, this can be strong, but it is often not. A good way to focus on this style of play is to think about it as a battle of claimed space rather than a battle of damage. Understanding that you can backdash to get certain reactions, jump straight up to get other reactions, and jump over your opponent's head in certain cases can entirely shift the flow of the match relative to just trying to make sure you get to hit them with your mix-up. Characters who are particularly good at getting over the head or doing moves once in the air that the opponent cannot afford to simply react to you going into the air get a much bigger advantage out of this than others. Cell has at least 4 aerial attacks that are very useful to him. So he really doesn't have to care about being on the ground in neutral at all. Nappa also has at least 2 good ones. Which, even though they are both relatively unsafe, are very unlikely to be expected. And the higher he is in the air, the easier it is to bait the opponent into doing things. Unfortunately, the one thing you should not use as a defensive mix-up player is the super dash, and the reason is that unless you are already in a scramble, the super dash is always blockable from the front and always blockable relatively easily. Since it always puts you too close to the opponent to do any defensive mix-ups, you've not benefited from using it in most game plans at all. Anyone with a better capacity to damage or to hold on to you will more or less get free pressure because you did the super dash. And as we get better and better, it is more likely that even if they went into the air themselves, they will have a response to it that will clip you out of it. This is separate from characters like Vegeta Blue, who actually have a ton of air options that have different vectors. That sort of character is much better at the offensive mix-up, they just don't have to play neutral on the ground. Another reason why this is effective for counter-style characters and frustration-style characters is that if you keep giving the opponent the impression that you don't know how to attack them, they will take the space themselves and try to attack you more. With good reactions, or at least a good read on your opponent, you can take a lot out of them with this. Especially with the fact that assists can be called in the air in the exact same way without any problems. We were discussing this last week as a generality. Calling your assist in the air to cover the space underneath you so that your opponent cannot approach gives them something else to think about. They don't get to use your jump as a free repositioning opportunity. Obviously, this depends on what your assists do. But the three we're looking at here do functionally set up situations like that very well. Since this fighting style builds up a lot of meter and offers you a lot of options, you can then use your meter at clutch moments, especially your level 3, to get out of bad situations and deal some good damage if you've managed to get an opponent to feel confident enough to leave a character who has a fairly high amount of damage already on their bar in the match. If they think you're not really going to attack them, players may be more likely to leave their character who has like a quarter health in to pressure you and then get hit by raw super and die.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
So, in terms of the game plans we were discussing, if you are playing this style, your aim for your meter is to use it in large bursts to save yourself from otherwise annoying situations, or when your opponent goes into the air along with you. Your aim while on defense is to get out of the space where you need to play neutral. And your reactive aim against your opponent, especially when you are cornered like this, should be to use your assist to gain loose position and set up positive situations for you. These three parts of it are probably enough to get you through at least some of what's happening. Among advanced skills, you can try to use your deflect for various purposes, once you've gotten used to it enough. The key is to stay calm enough to not necessarily react to your opponent's movement until you are sure, and let your mind focus on that while you spend some time hitting buttons or attacks that don't take up a lot of your mental space. You can then use your sparking and level 3s to get you out of pressure in the corners, because it takes so much longer for your opponent to put you there relative to most characters. Using your meter or sparking blast in neutral means that your opponent can predict you much more easily and are much more likely to be able to keep up their pressure on you. Therefore, you should also aim to use your assist to cover the space underneath you when you do go into the air. You can see in multiple situations there where Wake Up Final Flash would have been useful. It is this way that players decide how to use which wake up, which way that your opponent will be caught by this thing or that thing. When you can get a player to constantly get caught by your wake up super or wake up EX move in other games and never once manage to actually bait it, it's usually a sign that you frustrated them by playing neutral well enough that when they do get the opportunity to put pressure on you, they are focused on the pressure. They're probably not watching your meter because in their mind you didn't build up a lot of meter. They've forgotten entirely about your meter.
Get ready for a Dragonball Rumble!
This becomes even more important against the big body characters in most games, because understanding how to stay in and out of range relative to them is outright the definition of whether or not you're going to win or lose. But a defensive mix-up character is constantly putting themselves into the range of this character type. Therefore, even one situation in which you happened to get grabbed or set up your spacing incorrectly would result in you taking a massive amount of damage. Very much of the game relative to characters like Android 16 and Brawly is a matter of not being there in the first place. Understanding how long you will spend in the air as well, and therefore when you can start your next move, allows you to do things like that, to react to the opponent's action taken based on your flow. Though Brawly is an armored powerhouse, it is difficult for Brawly to actually get a lot of damage if you can stay out of his range. His range is quite good, but staying out of it is not so hard because of your other options, and the fact that he doesn't have a whole ton of really good upward attacks. Those who are familiar with this type of character know that staying off the ground is generally useful, but in most other fighting games, there's no way to be quite this effective while being in the air. It is an important skill in most fighting games, but again, more so than usual in Dragon Ball FighterZ, to understand how to watch your opponent while you are doing something like jumping straight up or backdashing. If you spend too much time focusing on making sure you actually did the backdash or understanding where your character is on the screen because you're not sure that you executed it correctly or any of those things, you're probably not only wasting your energy, you're giving your opponent more options. Because the number of times that you could punish them, but fail to because you weren't paying enough attention to where they were while you were doing something that you were perfectly aware of the general flow of, the more likely it is that you will have very little effect on anything. Similar to Guilty Gear, jumping straight up forward can also help you, because you do not end up going so far forward that your opponent gets to do an action against you just for jumping. Jump back and then dash forward is yet another really good option in this case, for the same reason. But all of these require that when you have committed to going into the air, that you then spend your time figuring out where your opponent is and what they are doing, rather than trying to think of what you want to do from there because you don't have the time. The entire reason you would have decided to go into the air is to avoid a potential attack from your opponent, which means you should probably have been paying attention to what that attack was if there was one.
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
However, Cell can also be played in a very space control style. Due to his generally good forward-moving attacks, it is possible to keep going for a very long time if you decide to play Cell without specifically aiming for the defensive mix-up options. As you can see, Broly's reach is quite good, but as long as you don't give him a lot of stuff to repunish, generally he can't use that reach in an offensive way to cause you a lot of trouble, unlike Cell, who has, again, defensive long-range mix-ups. Broly does not completely lack them, but you can get out of a lot of them fairly easily, whereas with Cell you can't be absolutely sure that you will get out. Cell can pursue you very quickly even if you backdash, as an example, whereas Broly can more so keep you from coming back to him. Your game plan with Brawly is probably to simply oppress your opponent into the corner by making them very aware that you can whiff punish basically anything they do, and whenever they try to run away from you, just use the moves you have to keep them moving backwards. Against most characters, since Raw Vanish will basically not do them any good, when they eventually start to feel pressured, that is where Brawly's armored moves come in. He has gotten too close for them to escape from the move itself. He's so big that chances are if they try to evade him, they'll end up in his hitbox. And they simply can't take any actual actions against him either. Therefore, Brawly's armored moves are strongest on reads and that moment where you've gotten your opponent relatively close to the corner and you're in range to do whatever else you want. You'll note that his speed, on the other hand, is fairly bad, and therefore, most of his time is spent walking forward oppressively. If you spend too much time attacking as Brawly, it's likely you're not going to be very successful. At least not at the main levels of play. You will need to come up with a specific team, a specific approach with your team and assists to get this result. It may even be better to simply wait it out and see what the general wisdom for playing Brawly when your aim is to make Brawly as effective as possible turns out to be on the higher level, and then just try to mimic that until you understand it at least, and therefore know whether or not you want to emulate it, modify it, or just go in another direction entirely. But for now, the name of the game is patience. Not necessarily that you should defend quietly, but that you should take advantage of the fact that the character is so good at walking forward and doing stuff without having to actually defend. He will, however, need some assist to help him out of pressure situations. And it's important to pay attention to when you recover from being attacked so that you can set up spacings you can use for him. Similarly, Brawly's assist is to make the pun quite straightforward. You don't have to think too much about what it is for. Most of the time it is to actually improve your same oppressive walk down to the corner feeling with your other characters. Because as you can see, he prevents people from doing a lot of stuff. So if you are moving forward and you need a little extra help but don't want to make yourself whiff punishable or do anything too serious, since Brawly's assist is not particularly useful for anything else under most circumstances in the game until you've reached the corner or set up something, and since neutral is enough of a struggle as is, just call him. Just call him and have him cover that space in front of you so that you don't have to do it with your own character. Your currently on-screen character. You can use this to reposition your spacing and get not necessarily openings to attack, but reposition yourself to become more threatening, because that's the whole aim here. Brawly is there to help you be threatening. He thankfully also does an incredibly good job of what I mentioned before, covering the ground space when you have had a reason to go into the air as a defense. As you can see, that massively optimal range allows him to do a ton of things when the opponent doesn't react to him walking up. And there we see the assist, helping Brawly get back to that oppressiveness. Unfortunately not enough this time, but you can see where the change in flow happens. Unfortunately, despite his look, Brawly is not actually that good at helping you land Dragon Rushes. Either with himself or from assist situations. This is because Brawly's Dragon Rush is the same as every other Dragon Rush in the game, and therefore your opponent is probably already thinking about how to get away from it or how to whiff punish Brawly's attacks. If you want to play Brawly in the way where he gets to do his Dragon Rush fairly often, to mix up with his Command Rush and so on, you're going to need to think very hard about how your assists function relative to your team. You probably do not want assists that are too likely to be easily deciphered. You don't want your opponent to understand what's going on while your assist is happening. And no, filling the screen with the explosion smoke is not necessarily the way to do that, because that is ambiguous, but it doesn't really have a problem in terms of understanding when it comes to things like Dragon Rushes. You have to get them to the corner before that will even work. Note that one of the strengths that Cell has in this situation, for example, is that when he is in the air and blocks the opponent's attacks, he's probably one of the strongest equipped characters for dealing with that. He has all sorts of good pseudo punishes for the I have blocked your dragon, your super dash up acting situation. Further complemented by the fact that in this particular team, even if Cell does not know what to do, calling an assist is going to solve the problem. This fighting style allows this type of team to build a lot more meter than the alternate way of playing Cell with more offensive characters as his backup. Note that if your team has a very high cohesive synergy and you do get put in the corner by rushdown, it may be worth using your sparking very early to solve the problem. It is in fact an entire strategy at high level play at the moment to make sure you last long enough in neutral to get your opponent down to 2 characters to your 3 and automatically win that way. Cell also has this option of not spending his meter too much on anything at long range because he has so many good options for moving around the screen or landing long range attacks with the opponent being unable to be sure of themselves. This also makes him a good point character in this team because he gets to save a lot of effort. So while in the air, he can attack in opposite side of the screen in at least 3 ways without even using any meter. Bringing that into the mix just makes it more troublesome than anyone could ever find it worth. Your opponent therefore slowly uses up more and more of their meter to keep up with Cell. And that allows him to either end up using it himself when he is the last character left, or being the battery for other characters, which makes him a good point if you are playing him in that.
The outcome of this fight is anybody's guess! It's all or nothing!
Which brings us to the question of the mirror match, something that is not necessarily thought about a whole lot. The mirror match is actually fairly easy for the defensive mix-up style Cell, because the different style of play means that it's much harder for the offensive Cell to make any progress in the matchup. It is in fact probably better to switch it out like that and not have to put up with that, because the different style of play unless you want to emulate it, leads to a lot of misery. Especially when you start to consider the natural instinct of each player and the flow that they use in the game. A further difficulty is that catching Cell with your assists, given his playstyle, is even harder than functionally catching Frieza. At least with Frieza, you know Frieza will come back down in the same place, so you could wait longer. With Cell, you can't be sure that you won't be left open yourself and in a lot of pain. Fortunately, Teen Gohan is much more equipped to deal with Cell. Probably intentional by design, given the lore, as he's much more capable of crossing the screen quickly and avoiding Cell's moves. He's also much better at very quick punishes, meaning that if Cell does happen to be blocked or go in the wrong direction, or that your defense is even decent, a quick use of EX Meter should put Teen Gohan in position to deal with Cell and get something started. Fortunately, Cell fell before he could make use of any of that 7 meter that came about as a result of this playstyle. The style takes longer to come into Blossom simply because one must spend so much more time learning how to utilize your meter at the right time for damage. But a good way to explain what the aim there would have been is simply that most of the characters on the opponent's side were low enough to probably just die instantly if caught in raw level 3 from Cell, which would have basically evened up the match again. You need to pay a lot of attention to this when you are fighting against defensive mix-up characters, specifically defensive mix-up Cell. Because while you could vanish and deal with a lot of his stuff, if you get it into your head that he's not going to use that option, when it does come, it will probably be a calculated defeat of one of your characters and a big setup. It is particularly dangerous if you happen to try for assist pressure in neutral. If you have a tendency to use your assist pressure at the same time in the game in general, be aware that anyone with a full screen beam super will make you regret it.
また粉々にしてやる。16号。
Are you ready? Fight it out!
行くぞ。うんせい。ニュン。だ。生きた。カメハメハ。こいつはどうか。甘いな。スピードには自信があるんだ。行くぞ。うん。何か。さあ。すぐ楽にしてやる。くらえ。無駄だ。さっさとしろ。俺が殺してやろう。
Fight it out!
協力してもらおう。すぐに終わらせてやる。さっさとしろ。さあ地球ごと消えてなるよ。許しませんぞ。協力見せてみろ。無駄だ。何楽にしてやる。全体しこのせいぜい楽しませてくれよ。邪魔だ。よっだ。そら下しやれ。この私にバリアを張らす。この程度か。ずっ遅い。この程度か。この程度。遅い。このベジータ様を失望させるなよ。何なんだ。程度か。行くぞ。話にならん。行くぞ。無駄だ。行くぞ。クズ。なんだと。てめえらなんかがこのナッパ様にかなうわけがないんだ。
ナッパウィン。
その程度の戦闘力で俺たちに歯向かうつもりか。
A fierce showdown is about to begin.
地獄のような未来はもうたくさんだ。
トランクス、私をがっかりさせないでくれよ。
One of the greatest weaknesses of the defensive mix-up playstyle is that moment where they need their assist to cover them, but the assists are on cooldown. This is a very difficult thing to watch for in terms of information on the screen, and it would be a lot easier to just deal with mentally. Just be aware of when they've switched out too recently or when their assists are not being able to be used at the moment. And realize that when they've pressured you after that, it's your turn. Note the speed that you would need to understand the changes in the playstyle from this side in order to keep up with Vegeta, Nappa, and Cell. It's not that doing what is necessary against any individual thing they intend is hard, but rather that the complexity of the whole can go up against you very quickly. And since they are generally almost never without meter, it's relatively easy to get set up by this. By the time you've managed to do any damage to them, you see this situation, where you have to give them so much meter that making the comeback against you is probably not all that difficult. Saved by the fact that Nappa's level 3 is not as good as the others. Trunks' mobility makes it much easier for him to deal with Cell, as he can get through a lot of Cell's stuff and get out of the way of a different set of stuff if he really needs to. So once again, the lore has given us that Trunks and Team Gohan are strong against Cell.
ちょっと力を出しすぎてしまったかな。不意打ちでも狙っていたのか。残念だったな。
To make progress in a game with this many moving parts, it's best to take it one step at a time, of course. But particularly, to pay attention to which part of it you are most comfortable with first. Failing that, pick whatever is safest to do. A relatively large problem with working on extremely complex combos or mix-ups is that you make yourself unsafe whenever you fail. This isn't bad because you lose. This is actually bad because whenever you drop a combo, you have to go through all of the work in neutral to get back to the chance to use the combo again, making the entire game experience relatively stressful. Your aim, while learning, should generally be to reduce the stress part of the game as much as possible. So that you have something to fall back on when it's time to learn something that absolutely will be more stressful. As you can see demonstrated here, Genshin is a very good character for mid-range mix-ups, offensive ones. But whenever they fail, he's in a lot of trouble. And they're relatively hard to execute correctly. It's not that he doesn't get a good reward for them, especially when he has meter. His reward is wonderful. But if you just end up trading with your opponent in terms of you managing to get one big one, then go for another big one, and they defend and get to go for theirs, your benefit disappears relatively quickly. Especially since hitting people with really cool combos tends to build up their meter faster. But here we see the incredible power of Team Gohan to just eat your entire health bar. And the unfortunate result that, as mentioned, ended up having to go for the next combo or pressure, opponent having a lot of meter, therefore having a lot of options, and you ending up taking a ton of damage. Unfortunately, please note that defending properly in the game does not tend to give you a lot of meter. Combined with what we mentioned last week about the ability to effectively force neutral to end in a lot of ways, it's easy to lose track of your opponent's game plan while doing your own combos. So not only must you learn your combos, you must learn to do your combo while keeping in mind whatever it was your opponent was doing before you started the combo. If the combo starts to take up your mental space in a match, chances are you're just going to end up getting punished when you do the turnaround. If you are a combo heavy player or a mix-up heavy player, this still works. It just means that you have to put in extra effort into practicing the combos to the point where you basically need to be able to do them while talking on the phone, listening to something on YouTube. When you can do your combos in that situation, that means you can probably handle them in this game, because you will not lose track of your mental stack in the background and what you were trying to do before you got your opponent opened up and actually got to land your combo. Note, of course, that King Gohan does not specifically need to worry about neutral as much when facing defensive characters. This means he gets to spend a lot more time building up his meter and pushing on people once he opens them up. Here you see the aforementioned mix-up that occurs when one has had enough time to get the opponent to not respond to you jumping into the air. It allows you to get the jump forward, Dragon Rush, all sorts of things. Just take them off guard by the fact that you did something, rather than just using your air hop as your defense. Does that close the lounge? It should close the lounge. Well, if it did, as mentioned, we will rotate through whoever is hosting. As to however the problem came up. In my case, it was a direct error in the software, apparently. So, no internet problem. So we're going to move it over to OmniRabbit. And I'll be back once I can get back in. Hopefully there's nothing too serious wrong with it. Same lobby, same passcode, same location. Only difference is that now you're looking for Trunks.
Time to begin the match! It's all or nothing! Fight!
Alright, no specific problems other than that obviously I can't see the current match. So if you've been paying attention to Twitter, we're seeing a lot of brawly tech that involves unblockables, specific spacings, and so on. Our takeaway from this so far is don't let brawly get you to the corner. But obviously that's a little harder than it sounds. On the other hand, is it really? If we look at what Brawly's options are against Raw Vanish, even when he blocks it, and his better options for the mix-up between your Dragon Rush and your instant air dash over his head, So far, we haven't seen anything that indicates that Broly can keep you in the corner by himself. Obviously, he has some options. He can read your options and because of his long range, hit you with a bunch of stuff, but he can't be sure that he'll hit you. Your aim therefore should be to make sure that you don't get cornered, and if you do get cornered, try to get out quickly. His mid-screen stuff, while it's still fairly terrifying, and often puts you in the corner very quickly, does not work that well if you're willing to stay decently far away from him. And since his movement is slow and he can't necessarily set up Dragon Rush on his own, you do have some options as long as he's not got enough meter to shield himself as he comes in. This means that we expect to see Broly played with a lot of assists who can shield him. The relatively popular Cell and Vegeta style assists, of course. Some possibility for Goku, Goku Black, etc. We're less sure about Trunks because despite the short hit stun, it might not actually work, since Broly's command stuff tends to be an actual hit. And most of us know not to respond to those. So we're back into the match to decide which form of Cell is more perfect. Perfect offense or perfect defense.
Ready? Let's go!
This obviously, as you can see, turns out to be quite heavily a battle of assists. And it's also because of the assists that one cannot simply switch which style of Cell you've chosen to play mid-match easily without having some extremely versatile assists. Our defensive Cell is locked into being at least somewhat defensive based on having Nappa and Vegeta assists. And our offensive Cell is similarly relatively locked into being offensive due to having King Gohan and Kenshinhan assists. Note there that even the slightest combo, even just a couple jabs, to get you into the combo state will allow your Vanish to be more effective than raw Vanish. It doesn't come up that often, but you should at least consider it. If you happen to clip your opponent with something, you're much more likely to be effective. You're gonna kill? No. I can tell you from the beginning, no.
あんなタコをいたぶって楽しいか。
そろそろ殺してしまうか。さあ、こいつはどうだ。防げまい、砕け散る。無駄だ。そんなはずがない。すぐに終わらせてやる。無駄だ。
So the key to understand here is that with enough meter, Cell can make this comeback by himself. This is what makes defensive Cell as point so potent, because he's so unlikely to die in the initial neutral. And he is so likely to build up enough meter to pick apart the opponent's team without him doing anything in particular. After that, it's really just a question of execution. But say the combat does not happen. Similarly, it is important to understand when your point character is functionally also able to work as your anchor, based on both your playstyle and just general understanding of style of combos. Offensive Cell has the downside that he is actually more likely to die randomly and therefore not be able to function in the same way. It's not at all that Cell as a character needs anything, because obviously if he is acting as point and then becoming anchor and finishing the job, he has no assists. So technically the Cell is completely the same, except for the problem that he has to manage to survive long enough to get there.
It's all or nothing. Let's go.
You see it demonstrated here. Defensive Cell can just spend a large amount of time playing around in neutral until it feels like the right time frame to leave. Whatever that means. And then he simply takes on his job acting as an assist to cover other situations. He also functions as a defensive shielding assist in neutral for many characters whose game plans don't require them to be so close. Whereas Vegeta can have more problems, Cell tends to be effective at the job without any effort. But here we have the Brawly corner situation, and as I said, you're supposed to mostly jump out of this or go for Dragon Rush. You can't do anything else other than probably activate Sparking on level 3 because there's nothing that Brawly cares about. But of course remember that both of those things are just to keep Brawly from getting so close to you that you can't use Vanish as an option. It's not that Vanish is a bad option, it's that Brawly can stay so close as to make Vanish useless unless you do at least one other thing. Note once again that despite everything else, from the game plan side, even if Vegeta falls, there is Cell with his 33% life and his probably 6 meter, ready to make the comeback as needed. Well, there's the 6 meter. Vegeta is such a battery. Still, obviously, you want to stretch it out as long as possible so that that does not need to happen. Or this needs to. Or not. And as you can see, when the meter is gone, Cell still has the capacity to cover for Vegeta for quite a while, just playing pure neutral. That's probably a moment to vanish out. Against Brawly, it will be super important to actually use your air vanish as a recovery because he has so much control over everything else going on the screen relative to his spacing and other options that if you don't vanish out of your recoveries, you're probably going to fall. But because unlike other characters, Brawly generally needs to try to move toward you or at least move around to continue his combos, let's call them combos, after he has knocked you into the air, it's much more likely that he will get clipped by the vanish.
Should be a great fight! Are you ready? Go! Counter!
There you see the development of the flow. Cell has so many moves that simply cross the entire screen that him going into the air and the opponent attempting basically any response is them choosing to die. As mentioned in the chat earlier, there is one meaningful response that can be used in almost all situations. But it can be stopped, especially by Cell. And it's generally frustrating when it fails, to the point where one might not want to do it again. Cell is particularly good at creating this problem and therefore becomes very stressful for anyone who doesn't have the patience to put up with it. This would be even worth it. Ah yes, Spark and Blast ran out just in time to make it worth it. Although, Nappa will probably just regenerate it all and it will still not be worth it. As a character, Vegeta's strength in this sort of situation is that he now has both Cell and Nappa to cover him, an invincible move, and therefore can Dragon Rush all he wants. It's extremely difficult to be sure of the timing for Vegeta's pressure, because once he gets back to the ground, the instinct is to defend if you haven't already hit him. Vegeta's ability to consistently reposition himself before you can do anything, and his tendency to stay very close with his good buttons, means that his overall outcome from Dragon Rush is usually better than most characters. You can't simply take an action to resolve it because he can do invincible moves. Unfortunately, Nappa pressure relies so much on assists that it can be difficult sometimes to get things right for him. As you can see there, one can immediately hit something, but eventually that will just cause the Vegeta player to do Crusher Knee after their dive hit. And you don't really want them to have that option too much because they will kill you. With the Vanish recovery, but the level 2 takes it.
トランクス、私をがっかりさせないでくれよ。
お前を殺すぞセル。
Get ready!
スピードには自信がある。カメハメハッさて
Counter!
ささまくれ。
どけバカ野郎！
カメハメハッ
マセイコ
どうした
ーバカだ。行くぞ。やーフランス。
無駄だ。
邪魔だ！おさん！ダメだ！
マセイコー。消えろ。行くぞ。黙れ。バカだ。触った。セルラッパー。
Counter!
交代できますか。正当だ。行くぞ。捕らえた。
ちょっとゲームをしよちょっとゲームを貴様さて防げまい砕け中この私にバリエーを張らせるとさて防げまい砕け中ここは握ってやろう
触りだ。遅い。任せてください。はい。遅い。行きますよ。これが俺の全力です。短い。一等だ。出さないぞ。修行の成果を見せてやる。
この手何
いっぱい飛ばすぞ。大丈夫ですか。無惨ぞ。
無駄ださあ
無惨ぞ。
全体にこの調子に乗りやがって
この程度か。
選ぶ口を叩けなくしてやるぜおっと見えたぞおっとへっへっへ
マセコ
脅かしやがって
せいぜい楽しませてくれよ。遅い。しゃどうしまった。行くぞ。飛べ。しゃ修行の成果を見せてやるのか。行くぞ。遅い。遅い。許さんぞ。雑魚だ。遅い。俺様だ。そっか。調子に乗りやがって。
Wonderful!
お願いします。トランクスさん。
顎は突っ込んだ
よっ。お願いします。どうだ。
今度は俺が相手です。交代できますか。
クリリンさん、引退しても力衰えていないな。僕も見習わなくちゃ。
It's time to face your opponent.
In the case where you're attempting to play rushdown mix-up style, or even just offensive mix-up style, against this sort of team of heavy grapplers with armor and other moves,
知らない。見たこともないぞ、あんなやつ。
the key to your understanding is that there is a zoning phase first for you, which is not normally true. The aim of your zoning phase is not necessarily to actually zone the opponent out, but to frustrate them into thinking that moving forward rather than putting up with all the zoning would be a good idea. And then you simply let them. They somewhat lack the ability to launch a lot of meaningful attacks from far, making it much more likely that they'll try to get in. And once they do, probably put themselves in the range of your relatively longer normals, such as your stand heavy, or in Trunks' case, even the crouch heavy. You're relying on the fact that the opponent has no good attack vectors from the other side of the screen to get your chance to hit your own stand heavy when they approach you. And if you realize they aren't approaching, just roll more beams. And then of course we have the person who breaks all of the rules of that. Actually, Brawly breaks pretty much all of the rules of everything, by definition. That said, as you can see there, against this type of character, because you don't have to worry about a lot of their approaches, you can be a lot more prepared for things like crouch heavy on super dash and similar. From the grappler side, this is where assists become important, especially now that Brawly is available. He can back up 16 in these situations by simply throwing out that big beam. However, we often have other being characters on teams with grapplers to solve the problem. They can at least somewhat push back on the zoning that the other will help with. Resulting in you being able to walk forward into the correct range and use your armored moves to finish the job. This also prevents you from facing the situation where you are facing off the grappler you have decided, okay, I'm the maximum distance from you, and then they actually decide to key charge. It is not a common tactic, obviously, but there are times in the game when charging your key against an opponent is useful. You can in fact charge it against grappler teams that don't have long range assists, because what are they going to do about it? Ha! Looks like our defensive cell player has switched out. Probably next week we'll be seeing more of that with the Vegeta Dragon Rush style play incorporated, and moving onward from there. So we're back to a team that, though they are the offensive mix-up side, still benefit quite a lot from being in the air a large amount of the time at long-range neutral. The difference is that, unlike Cell, you can be fairly sure that they're going to attack you eventually, and you have to be more prepared for it than you need to figure out how to get to them. The key, therefore, realizing how to not be taken by surprise by whatever they choose to do. It is actually reasonably hard to track what is going on when any of these three characters that Rin Siren is playing go into the air. The simple answer would be hit something to make sure that they can't hurt you, but they're really, really good at having options you can't do that with. It's easy to say, hit something else, solve the problem, but there is no something else that is consistent enough to solve your problem. And they're all capable of doing a lateral attack in the air so that you can't just jump yourself. Generally, the longer this team spends in the air, the harder they become to kill. They also have so many moves that can be done from close air situations that the neutral jump Z change is a legit mix-up for this team. Your best bet, therefore, is to keep them as close to the corner as possible so that you don't have to worry about what happens when they jump straight up. They don't get the option in the first place.
ったな。来い孫悟飯。
やろう。
だよそろそろ天津飯。だよ次の砕け中。地球ごと消えてなくなる。
Against most opponents, as you can see, staying anywhere near the ground is just going to lead to bad things.
調子点数をつけるとすればそこだ。
カメハメ。
Insufficient for the finish, unfortunately. But the scramble.
やってみます。
Note again that moment, Vegeta, every time Vegeta gets hit, he's on the ground. My mind could try to say that 3 different ways. However, the effort to do damage to him in the long term, as he spends more time in the air, increases exponentially.
ありがとうございました。いくら一緒に戦っても、やっぱり僕はお前を味方だとは思えない。
Brace yourself for the coming battle!
Trunks か。今のお前では俺に勝つことはできない。
人造人間だ。何者だ貴様。
Get ready! Go!
もう逃げられん。甘いな。
As demonstrated here, without the zoning phase, the intimidation factor of grapplers, even in this game, makes it hard to take yourself seriously. That's the best way to put it. To go in with the confidence that you going in will lead to something and not to you getting hurt. Broly's long range does apply to his air normals as well, leading to some interesting toss-ups. However, they are relatively easy to see coming if you're paying attention to it, and you only get caught off guard due to the idea that he wouldn't be able to reach you and then being proven wrong.
Get ready for battle! Get ready! Go!
As you can see, this matchup becomes a lot of neutral, mostly because of the space at which these characters tend to stay from each other. Trunks and Teen Gohan are both able to punish from fairly far away, meaning that neither of them has a specific reason to get too close in order to start anything. They can both rely more so on their assists to buy them space if they really want to get in. with the general knowledge that most of the game will be played on the defensive blocking side of things. Despite the fact that both of these are relatively often mixed-up styles, the fact that they end up far away from each other like this means that it's relatively easy to see the opponent's mix-up coming. And because one also tends to take turns, basically as soon as it is your turn to attack, it's likely that they will play it out. Being mixed up by neutral things is much less likely as well. This means that most of this game's damage happens in the scramble situation where neither player is sure whether or not they should actually be acting yet. If you watch the scramble interactions versus the pressure interactions, it's much easier to see this. Because even with that vanish, for example, it's functionally raw vanish. There was no real damage given off that. Therefore, it is in the interest of both players, at least somewhat, to let things fall back into the scramble so that they can get their damage. Not specifically because one likes scrambles, but simply that continually going back and forth with each blocking the other results in a meter imbalance eventually.
貴様の力はこんなものじゃないはずだ。孫悟飯よ。
It's time to face your opponent! Get ready! Let's go! Counter!
On the opposite side here, while we are much more likely to see this, the fact that the shift does not result in anyone specifically moving forward at the end of their combo means that we get to a known scramble earlier. In short, Kid Buu gets to play footsies because he gets to push someone out to a particular space, or put them where he wants them on the screen, and then see what they do about it. For fairness, he doesn't have too many good buttons for doing other things. Also the reason why it is so likely that this match will be played out mostly between the two Gohans. Since the scramble situations happen much more easily, whoever ends up with the Gohan standing often has the advantage simply because they have a better option for scrambles. The question then becomes is to take this approach and protect Gohan while building up meter for him to finish off things, or try to make better use of the synergy between the two and keep Gohan on the offensive. That is entirely a matter of the personal style and skill of the player, but having Gohan use the Sparking Blast is almost certainly the better option. Understanding the principle of matchup versus anchor is very important because while you cannot necessarily change your team order outright, it's relatively easy to swap people in and out. There's just a small cost in health if you try to do it raw in many situations. Therefore, the position of character in your team does not necessarily decide your strategy for you, but you should probably decide it yourself. For example, Broly's strength against the offensive mix-up style and his general difficulty using meter against very mobile opponents makes him an easy choice for the point character in this matchup. whether or not this is actually executed has a lot more to do with whether or not Trunks switches out, because Trunks and Broly at least go even, as far as we know so far. So might as well stay on Cell, who has a bit more advantage. But again, this is partially about opponent style as well. Ultimately, there are more extreme options involving using this. Because 16's capacity to keep opponents out by simply repeating this move is relatively high, and tends to deal with assists as well, he can handle many situations where he uses his Sparking Blast, as well as the expectation that he will use that move to buy himself time to do other things. As you can see, it's quite safe in many situations, resulting in him basically just being able to keep up pressure for free. Unfortunately, this time he went a little far, and a level 3 from the other side was waiting. In this matchup, the capacity to handle the offensive mix-up is notably higher. Because once again, Teen Gohan can punish basically anything he wants. And his shorter buttons do not really make much difference against a character who is not intending to play neutral in the first place, namely the entire opposing team. Cell, on the other hand, has a game plan built around that and relatively slower punishes, making it more difficult for him to actually make progress in this part of the matchup. His lack of responses to certain types of pressure and long-range punishes also make it harder for him unless he gets further away and gets his own pressure started. So, the fact that Teen Gohan's neutral is by most people's standards relatively bad doesn't matter if his punishes are good enough to deal with anyone who doesn't want to play grounded neutral in the first place.
すぐに終わらせてやる。ここは譲ってやる。
Since he also doesn't need so much meter to do it, and he builds it relatively fast once he can keep his loop going. The benefit to playing the other two members of the team in this match diminishes rapidly simply because the opponent is going to try to out-neutral you anyway, but they're doing it from a position where the longer buttons afforded by Cell and Ten do not lead to anything. So you might as well go for the Gohan loops and the damage and everything else, and save those two for their true strength in the matchup, namely covering Gohan as assists. While they do not necessarily attack, you can actually get the opposite scenario than normal. Normally, we've been talking about going into the air and using your assist to cover the ground. King Gohan has the opposite capacity where he can attack from the ground and verify using his assist that the opponent went into the air. This does not work as well with Cell, but it's sort of useful with Kid Buu. Well, against Kid Buu. Because Kid Buu must go forward in order to finish his attack, Cell will get away with pretty much anything he wants as an assist. You don't really have to care about when exactly you call him. I'm always surprised by how much that move scales.
吸収するつもりではないようだけど、なぜ僕の味方をするんだ?
To begin the match.
Similarly, one could switch one's style with this team to being primarily about staying in the air and doing your mix-ups from there, to somewhat invalidate Tien and Cell. The difference is that these characters do not have the capacity to stay up there as long, and tend to need a lot more meter to get their job done. They also have moves that tend to leave them in more predictable spots, where you don't so much need Teen Gohan's maximum punish range to get out of it. You see there the early use of the sparking to basically refill the health gauge and make sure that it becomes a 3-2 match. In a situation where that did not successfully open up, Cell could have covered the rest of it.
かさないぞ。いっぱい飛ばすぞ。なんだ。修行の成果を見せて。
You'll note, of course, that him taking that level 3 has basically refilled the meter on that side, allowing King Gohan to return and be at extreme meter advantage. He's a powerful character in that once he starts to use his meter, he gets to keep using it, causing a rapid shutdown on the opponent's side altogether. So definitely remember, even if you are absolutely more interested in playing a team of 3 that you like rather than choosing a team based on assists, you can still create your own assist synergy simply by understanding which space you should try to occupy with your point character. The character on screen, that is. And what can be covered by your assist?
Get ready for battle!
In the grappler versus aerial mix-up matchup, a lot of one's energy is going to be used faking approaches. Armored moves, Z-change, walk up, deflect. All of these things become important because the aerial offensive mix-up character often responds to you approaching them by attacking. An armored move or a deflect timed correctly can put a lot of pain on them, but more importantly, it pushes them backward, and you want to eventually push them backward into nothing because they don't have a lot of options on the ground. They have to spend a lot of time in the match making sure that they aren't on the ground so that they can stay alive, and don't have as much time to make sure that they're moving forward. Now, for many people, it may be difficult to have the quote-unquote bravery required to do this sort of approach. However, if you're playing grapplers anyway, there's a good chance that you're already familiar with the feeling. The advantage to the grappler characters in such games is that they don't need to use their meter to do the armored moves to make the clones. This becomes progressively more and more important as the match drags on. They need extra damage from the meter and can't afford to be using it just to get closer. Understanding the opponent's rhythm, therefore, and how to use your armored moves relative to that rhythm mostly decides this part of the matchup. Further useful is the fact that since you have the command grab as the mix-up, your opponent can't be sure that once you get close that they don't have to try to move out of the way, making it more likely that you will in fact land some metered move. For this team in particular, their crouch heavy attack covers the last part of the space and they can move forward.
This should be a great fight.
In terms of long-term strategy, therefore, it becomes a question of how to get Team Gohan enough meter to do the job and keep himself going against the aerial mix-up style team. The quickest way is generally to let Cell Dragon Rush something. Landing a full Cell combo, if you watch carefully, only gives you about half a bar meter. It's insufficient to start Team Gohan winning pressure, and often to get good damage, you then have to use up that meter to vanish and so on. Since Tenshinhan does not have as many good mix-ups as Cell at the same range to force you to take the Dragon Rush, it's hard to gain that meter well enough to be sure of yourself. And trying to do so puts you at incredibly higher risk. But once Team Gohan is in position with enough meter, Buu becomes less dangerous, simply because Gohan doesn't need to worry about taking that damage and can punish from so far away. While this is not really disadvantageous to Buu as a matchup, this style of playing Buu is not likely to do well against this style of Gohan, because it mostly comes down to how twitchy the Gohan is and how likely they are to get hit by Candy Beam in neutral. Everything else is going to lead to stuff like that. As demonstrated, he's basically a baton. And once he has expended all his energy, you still probably have your backup characters to help him even longer. You can even think of them in a different way. If they do happen to take damage in neutral, all it's really doing is rebuilding more meter for Gohan. So even in the worst case scenario where you come close to dying or lose one of them, you just get Gohan back powered up, Super Saiyan 2 style, and able to finish the job. And this, of course, clarifies why our focus has been what it is. Understand your matchups, understand how to ration your meter for your matchups, and finally, of course, how you're going to get your main damage points, especially if your meter has to be used on something else. Even without a full understanding of your opponent's movement, you can still use your assist to cover your own movement in most matchups. And once this is done correctly, this will allow you to save some meter for new concepts. Notice you didn't see before that Brawly's super dash is powerful because his reach is so long that he doesn't really care where he hits you with the super dash. This team, while he appears to have the same capacity, is a little bit less dangerous, since he must cancel very early, and therefore it is more of a mix-up than a reactive trick. There's the aforementioned moment. Please note that Android 16 has been defeated by that assist, while attempting to assist.
スーパーサイヤ人ブルーとなった俺の敵ではない。礼は言わんぞ。この戦いを通じて俺はもっと強くなった。
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
So we're closing up the stream soon, possibly after this match, possibly after the next.
It's all or nothing.
So you get at least one more look at the aforementioned layout. Now know that one cell plays from the defensive mix-up style. a lot of the aerial offensive mix-ups lose a lot of their effectiveness. However, this is not a good way to build up enough meter for Team Gohan stuff, which means that to do so, you generally are committing to doing it. The only way you'll tend to get a lot of meter in that situation is if you actually get hit as Cell, which is generally not what you want. However, depending on your skill level, you may be able to take advantage of this, staying in as Cell as long as you can, and then finding a good moment to get him out, replacing him with Team Gohan, who will then have enough meter to get things started and keep it going. But as you can see here, without enough meter in his tank, basically, Team Gohan's capacity to deal with the aerial mix-up team drastically falls. He can't keep them occupied enough and has to rely a lot on assists. Unfortunately, this team doesn't have assists that really deal with aerial offensive mix-up style. The result being one of those situations where your execution skill takes a large backseat to your actual plan. In terms of which part of it is better. Fortunately, you can absolutely make up for this with a lot of execution skill. There are quite a few games where this is absolutely true. If you learn a good enough combo and are able to convert that combo in neutral all the time, your capacity to execute complex game plans can at least be mitigated. But more importantly, keeping your opponent from realizing that you have complex game plans to use, simply by doing a ton of damage and not making them think about it, is much more effective, and partially what you're seeing here. Even if one knows the game plan, there's no reason to go straight for it if you have enough confidence in your execution or your understanding of the opponent to get away without it. Doing so changes the psychological state of your enemy and allows you to throw them off guard by switching from an offense-based strike to simply hanging back and waiting for them to make a mistake themselves. They're extremely likely to take the advantage if they can get it, and you can take advantage of their error if they make one. Even if not, the way that the meter plays out, they're more likely to use up their meter, giving you meter, and not directly benefiting. So as always, we're probably going to close off after this standard time for stream.
Are you ready?
We hope you had something to think about based on this, especially with Brawly available to see. Next week, you're likely to see more stuff from my style of characters, who you don't get to see much apparently. And I'll see if I can give something approximating to good advice against them. But in the meantime, enjoy solving the puzzle of your opponent's matchup and style with your own characters. And as always, join us tomorrow for Street Fighter content, Monday for Street Fighter Lounge, Tuesday for Guilty Gear Lounge, and that Thursday for more Dragon Ball Kame House Lobby. Oh, and of course next week we will probably be covering at least any information that comes out if Bardock turns out to be terrifying somehow. And more importantly, recovery timings and directions, and possibly delaying those recovery timings. Well, that's it, everyone. This has been Lillian for 2MK. Enjoy your night.